Our collusion and corruption segment tonight. According to a new report, President Trump is not actually the subject of Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian influence during the 2016 election. Not at all. Instead, the report claims Mueller is focused on Paul Manafort, Trump's former campaign manager, and John and Tony Podesta. John Podesta was Hillary Clinton's campaign chair. Now, I'm not a fan of anonymous sources. I think they've been abused, especially in the past year, by a media who has an agenda and people who hide behind anonymity in order to warp the truth. But the source of this report claims that Manafort, who had connections to the Russians, also had a connection to the Podestas, who had connections to Hillary Clinton's State Department. So all of this may have happened before the campaign cycle ever even began. This is Tucker Carlson's exclusive report on the source of this information.
The man, whose name we can't reveal for the time being, is a former senior employee of the Podesta Group. He worked there for years. He said he was motivated to contact us by the disgust he felt watching media coverage of the Russia story. Not only were most reporters getting it wrong, he said, they were getting it backward. The Russians were, in fact, deeply involved in American politics, but the real story had almost nothing to do with the 2016 presidential campaign. Well, intrigued, we agreed to meet with that source today. He just left our offices here in Washington a couple of hours ago. The story he told us is astonishing.
With me now from the Center for Security Policy, former CIA analyst Fred Fleitz. Fred, good to see you.
Hey, Liz, good to be here.
Fred, this story just keeps getting more and more complicated, more complex, and more troubling. This source that Tucker Carlson is talking about, he claims that, or she, I suppose we don't know the gender, this source claims that reports that Trump is the center, the target of this investigation are greatly exaggerated, and the source claims that he or she is privy to Mueller's investigation.
Well, I think this all makes a lot of sense. I've discussed on this program several times that this finding by 3 intelligence agencies that Russia intervened in the election to help Trump win never made any sense, because they probably believed, like just about everyone else in the U.S., that Hillary Clinton was a shoo-in. We know from Tucker Carlson's report, if this is true, that the Russians apparently were trying to influence Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State and cultivate her as a future president. Doesn't that make a lot more sense than the Russians engage in a massive effort to ruin a presidential candidate who they didn't think could win?
Right, and that's the part of the story that we know for a fact. So what we just talked about, the report from the source who claims that Donald Trump is not the center or the target of this investigation, rather Paul Manafort and John and Tony Podesta are, that part is from the anonymous source. The part that's not an anonymous source, this part we know for a fact, is that Russia did want to cultivate Hillary Clinton. We know this because there was a spy ring of Russian spies. You can't make this stuff up, Fred. There's a spy ring that was busted several years ago in 2009 to 2010 for actively trying to infiltrate Hillary Clinton when she was at the State Department. They had a spy undercover with a false identity trying to get a job as close as possible to the State Department, not quite in the State Department because that might have revealed the fake identity, but trying to get as close as possible to get information in order to be able to influence Hillary Clinton if she were to become president. That part we do know for a fact.
And also to influence decisions Hillary Clinton would make as Secretary of State, including this Uranium One deal. Then we had maybe over $100 million in donations by Russian-affiliated organizations to the Clinton Foundation. And the FBI said their eyebrows were raised when Bill Clinton got a $500,000 payment for a speech right after Hillary Clinton left Moscow for a diplomatic meeting and while she was considering this Uranium One deal. I mean, if this isn't collusion, I don't know what it is.
Right, and at the same time, going back to Bill Clinton getting paid $500,000, $500,000, right after Hillary Clinton left Russia, this was during the negotiations for the Uranium One deal. And I wonder if it's a coincidence that this spy ring, I mean, this is a high-level spy ring, 10 Russian spies busted in America in this day and age. We're not talking about the Cold War, we're talking about modern times just a couple years ago. Right after these arrests, these spies were very quickly and very quietly just deported to Russia, sent back to Russia with little to no fanfare. And it was just a few days later that Bill Clinton received this $500,000 check. I mean, that's so sketchy. It's hard to believe that it is in fact true.
Clearly, the Russians were in collusion with the Clinton Foundation and the Clintons. And the Clinton Foundation was an operation to promote Hillary Clinton's candidacy and to allow various American and international entities to buy influence with the Clintons. That's what it was about. It was a corrupt enterprise. It's time to call them on this and to hold them accountable.
Right, and essentially, if we're taking the source on Tucker Carlson at his or her word, this would be the train of influence. This is how the Russians would have actually influenced Hillary Clinton's campaign. So the Russians hired Paul Manafort to represent their interests, to be a lobbyist for them, essentially. Paul Manafort was connected to John Podesta and his brother Tony Podesta. They ran the Podesta Group. So we have Russia, Manafort, the Podestas and the Podesta Group. John Podesta is clearly a close crony of Hillary Clinton. He was her campaign chair, but before that, he's always been a top advisor. So Russia, Manafort, Podestas, Hillary Clinton at the State Department, that's not an implausible train of influence. That's not an implausible, trail of connections that could have led to Russian interests being represented by Hillary Clinton, or a pay-to-play scheme in which, say, Hillary Clinton receives $500,000 through her husband for approving this deal. That's certainly entirely plausible.
And let's add to that the DNC and the Clinton campaign paid a foreign intelligence officer to work with the Russians to prepare a dossier to smear the Republican candidate. And this dossier was eventually picked up by intelligence agencies and briefed to Donald Trump as if it was legitimate. And the Clinton campaign and the DNC didn't say anything about it. They didn't admit that, well, actually, we were behind this.
Right. The whole thing, I mean, if bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. can't get the Democrats on this, can't get Hillary Clinton, John Podesta, Paul Manafort, all these people can't actually implicate them in this scandal, then they're a lot dumber than I even thought. And I didn't hold them in very high esteem even to begin with. Fred, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.